They have declared open warfare on our streets. It's something we have never in the city of Vancouver ever had to deal with before.
There were the Dosanjh brothers, Ron and Jim, who would later have a falling out with Bindy Johal. Not only was this organized crime, but it was orchestrated. It was a public showing off, if you will, one that's not been seen since.
And when there were finally charges, no one could have written the twist that happened during the court case.
Hey guys, in today's video we're going to talk about the notorious gangster from Vancouver, BC named Bhupinder Johal, aka Bindy Johal. He's known by many to be the first celebrity gangster in the Metro Vancouver area. Ever since I made my video on Driftwood's ties with the Brothers Keepers gang based in Vancouver, BC, I've gotten many requests on doing more videos on places in BC, as well as specifically Bindy Johal. And after looking into who he was and finding out just how insane his story was, I thought it was worthwhile to make a video. This is my first video that doesn't directly have anything to do with Toronto, so let me know in the comments if you would like to see more videos about Canada in general in the future. As I mentioned before, Bindy Johal was a well-known gangster, not only to police but also to many people in the area, because of how infamous of a character he was. When most people are under investigation and are receiving lots of attention from the feds, they understandably normally try to lay low for a while. Well, Bindy seemed to enjoy the fame that came along with it, with him regularly going to clubs and knowing that the police were following him everywhere he went. He became a famous figure through his public beefs on the media and interviews with news networks, as well as how he was the leader of a gang involved with a huge gang war and was essentially the face of the Indian gang problems in Vancouver at the time, with him reportedly making $70,000 to $90,000 a week at the height of his career. But even with him obviously being a criminal, many people see him as a hero, and I'll talk more about that at the end of the video. Let's get into it. Bindy was born in the state of Punjab in India and immigrated to Canada with his family when he was 4 years old in 1975. When he started secondary school in grade 8, he appeared not to have any problems, but as the years went by, he found himself earning a reputation for himself in the East Vancouver and in his school, Sir Charles Tupper Secondary School. This reputation was gained by his acts of violence and lack of respect for authority. In grade 12, he got expelled from his school for assaulting his vice principal, resulting in him being sentenced to 60 days in jail. Apparently his vice principal was lecturing him about his attitude, which turned into him questioning Bindy about his alleged gang activity, to which Bindy responded with kicking him in the groin. The kick was actually so hard that his vice principal was rushed to the emergency room. His gang connection that his vice principal was referring to started with one of his first and most significant crime associates he met in that same school. His name was Faizuddin. Faizuddin was a member of the Los Diablos street gang at that time. Los Diablos was a mid-level criminal organization that sold drugs and completed the violent contracted work that larger groups like the Lotus Gang tried to avoid getting involved with. In the 1960s, Los Diablos was mostly made up of people who spoke Spanish, but the gang became more multi-ethnic over time. It got to the point that when Bindy joined the gang in the late 80s, its members were almost exclusively of South Asian descent. Leadership of Los Diablos was held by Ron and Jimmy Dosanjh. Ron was said to be the brains of the organization, while Jimmy was the muscle. They bought narcotics in bulk and used their network of dealers to distribute the cocaine to customers across the city. Bindy was one of the dealers. When Bindy was asked in court about his relationship with Jimmy Dosanjh, he said, quote unquote, "I was a small-time drug dealer, he was a big-time guy. Wherever we went, we got respect because everyone was afraid of him. He was a big shot, and when I was beside him, I was a big shot." However, everything started to change when Jimmy Dosanjh was arrested with the murder of a Colombian cocaine trafficker. When Dosanjh was awaiting his trial, Bindy and Faisal decided to start working on their own and created their own gang. They began buying cocaine in bulk and selling it on the streets in direct competition with Ron Dosanjh and the Los Diablos. It was a really bold move, but Bindy knew that Ron was vulnerable at the time due to his brother being locked up. The plan actually ended up working so well that some of the Los Diablos members left to join Bindy and Faisal's gang. There was a slight peace between the rival gangs for a short period of time until some dramatic events would take place and bring Bindy to the public eye. It all started when Bindy's associate Faisal was arrested for the murder of a man named Bhupinder Johal. On the night of October 12th, Faisal called Bhupinder to set up a meeting, telling him that police had uncovered a credit card scam that they were operating. Bhupinder was on his way to work a night shift at a salvage yard, so he told Faisal to meet him there. When Faisal arrived alongside a man named Rajinder Banji, Bhupinder knew that the meeting wouldn't be about credit cards. It turns out that Bhupinder was dating Rajinder's 17-year-old sister, and he wasn't very happy about that. According to a court testimony, Faisal held Bhupinder down while Rajinder stabbed him 53 times. But where things get even more extreme is that 2 days later, Rajinder's sister committed suicide by jumping off of a bridge. She left behind a note saying that, "When Bhupinder died, I died." And as you can imagine, this was heavily reported on by the local news, causing everyone in the community to become aware of it. Now where does Bindy come into this? But there was actually 3 witnesses to the murder. Obviously the 2 co-accused, Faisal and Rajinder, as well as another man named Sanjay Narain. Apparently Sanjay was known to brag to women about his criminal activities and to freebase cocaine. Due to this, Bindy decided to silence him. Police heard many variations of how it went down, but they all went down something like this. On a December night in 1991, 2 cars pulled up to a road leading to the top of Cleveland Dam in North Vancouver. Young men in their early 20s got out and walked along the top of the dam on the Capilano River. They were expecting a drug deal to go down, but in the distance a shadowy figure appeared. He wore a long trench coat. As he approached, he drew a gun, pointing it at the head of one man in the group. Although police have heard various versions of what happened that night, investigators believe the man in the trench coat was the notorious Vancouver gangster Bindy Johal. Sanjay's body was later found in a river under the dam he'd been thrown off of. Of course, Bindy was a prime suspect for this, and was obviously starting to get a lot of attention from the media and people in the community after they heard the tales of a local Romeo and Juliet type story, along with the story of a mysterious man in a trench coat who threw a body off of a dam 300 feet in the air into a river. At this point, Bindy was gaining fame in the area since he was a notorious gangster that was a regular at many nightclubs, even with police following him everywhere he went. But that was only the beginning of the story, because at around the same time, Jimmy Dosanjh was released from prison. Witnesses at the preliminary hearing for his alleged murder refused to testify against him in court, so due to a lack of evidence, his charges were dropped and he was once again a free man. When he got out and heard about the news of one of his former lieutenants starting a gang that was a direct rival to his own, he obviously wasn't very happy, so he hired a hitman to take out Bindy. To this day, nobody really knows how Bindy found out about the hit on him, but he ended up paying the hitman twice what he was going to get paid to kill him to take out Jimmy Dosanjh instead, which he ended up doing. From this point, the community was convinced that Bindy was responsible for this murder, which was actually such a popular belief that he was invited to appear on the news to talk about what this killing meant for the future of the gang war in East Vancouver. During the interview, he said,
"This Jimmy Dosanjh, they portrayed him as a hitman, this, that. I mean, I guess he was a very serious person. From what I've seen of him on the street, I personally think he couldn't have hit his way out of a paper bag."
Next, they went to Ron Dosanjh's home to get his opinions on the situation to try and uncover the truth. Ron Dosanjh had his share of disrespect to say about Bindy, saying,
"If you want to talk about nobody, if anybody's a nobody buddy, maybe that's why your life is worth a loony on the streets today. I wouldn't shoot you in the back, but I'd do it right face to face, square in the forehead."
So obviously this back and forth trash talking on the news was making a public situation even more public, but it doesn't stop there. After this, there were drive-by shootings, nightclub shootings, and shootings in the street. And 2 weeks from the time of the interviews, Ron Dosanjh himself was shot dead in a drive-by shooting. He was reported to be waiting for a traffic light to change when a shooter came beside his truck and started firing at him with an AR-10 assault rifle in broad daylight. This public execution cemented Bindy's reputation as Vancouver's first celebrity gangster. The violence kept escalating from there though, because after the murder of Ron Dosanjh, Bindy decided to go into hiding, and hired his neighbor to watch his dog for a couple weeks while he was gone. And tragically, while the dog sitter was taking the dog for a walk in the park, a hit squad started firing at him with an AK-47, resulting in him being killed. News reporters were able to find Bindy and asked him if they thought that his life was in danger. To this, he replied with his most famous line,
"Just want these guys to know you got another thing coming, bitch. I'm still around."
He wasn't around long.
Now at this point, the city obviously had some major issues to figure out, since dog walkers were being murdered and gang leaders were beefing on the news. This is when the mayor organized a 150-man police unit to investigate the killings, spending over $1 million to solve these crimes and take down Bindy. Eventually, the police arrested Bindy and 4 others, and charged them with the murder of the Dosanjh brothers. 3 of the accused were released on a $100,000 bond, but they deemed Bindy and one other co-defendant too dangerous to release. The case ended up being one of the longest and most expensive in Canadian history because of all the security that was needed. Crown prosecutors spent 5 months laying out their case, which included over 100 witnesses and mountains of wiretap evidence. However, even with all of this effort, the case would eventually be thrown out, likely for something completely unrelated to the case itself. One of Bindy's co-accused was a man named Peter Gill. Peter had excellent grooming and a fancy suit that resulted in him catching the attention of a woman named Jillian Guess in the jury box. Apparently she was attracted to him and wasn't trying to hide it either, with her always flipping her hair and looking over at him while smiling flirtatiously. As I said earlier, 3 of the accused were released on bail, and Peter was one of them. So 3 months into the trial, Jillian and Peter met outside of the courtroom. During their date together, Peter explained to her that he was a victim of racism and that he was completely innocent. She ended up believing him, and that resulted in them having sexual relations that night. That was the first time in Canadian history that a juror had a sexual relationship with an accused murderer while the trial was still in court. Jillian and her fellow jurors decided on a verdict on not guilty on both of the murders. However, less than a month later, Jillian and Peter were seen dancing together at a nightclub. so police started following them around, and not too long after, it became clear that they were dating. They were both arrested and charged with obstruction to justice, but luckily for Bindy, the court had no grounds to retry him for the murders, and he was a free man for the first time in 2 years. Only 3 months after his release, there was a stabbing at a strip club, 3 drive-by shootings, and 2 nightclub shootings that were all tied to him. There were even rumors mentioning that he would go to nightclubs and shoot his firearm at the ceiling, the only purpose being intimidation and sending a message to the rivals that the boss was back in charge. However, this was a public display of dominance that wouldn't last long, because things started going downhill for him after that. In early 1996, one of Bindy's associates spotted 2 kilograms of cocaine off of a teenager named Randy Chan. It turns out that the 2 kilograms were diluted, and Bindy wasn't happy with this at all, so he stuffed Randy in his trunk and drove away. But this was very dangerous because Randy was the younger brother of a high-ranking member in the Lotus Gang. The next 56 hours were spent by Bindy negotiating the terms of Randy's release. Police learned about the kidnapping and sent 70 officers to look for the missing teenager. Eventually, Randy was released in exchange for 5 kilograms of cocaine. However, Bindy ended up getting arrested and charged for unlawful confinement. He told TV cameras, quote-unquote, "I'll beat this one for sure," as he was loading into a van for a court appearance.
Get the cameras out of my face, or I might have to remove them.
While Bindy was awaiting his trial, he was locked up in a cell with a man named Ball. Eventually, they became friends and started to trust each other. And this is when Bindy started recruiting him to become a member of his group named the Elites, who were basically a crew of people whose job was to assassinate Bindy's enemies. Eventually, Bindy was released on bail, and that's when the Elite got to work. Ball estimates that in the next few years, the Elite were responsible for roughly 25 to 30 murders. The murders began as strategic moves that helped the gang prosper, but eventually it got to the point where they were handling Bindy's personal beefs. And everything changed in the summer of 1998 when Ball and some associates were out at a nightclub. A young associate named Derek called Bindy and asked him to join them. Bindy said he was too tired, and Derek replied by calling him a baby. At the end of the night, Ball and the rest of the guys at the nightclub got into a truck and drove home. When they got home, they saw Bindy waiting for them. After he saw Derek in the back seat, he got in and told Ball he wanted to go for a drive. Ball, Derek, and Bindy ended up going to a secluded area when Bindy told Ball to stop the car because he wanted to get out and take a piss. As he left the car, he dragged Derek out with him. He then shot and killed him and told Ball to help him dump him in the river. Ball never trusted Bindy again after that night because he figured that if Derek could get killed over an insult, then nobody was safe, including him. But things only keep on getting crazier. In early December, Ball's suspicions of Bindy became true. Ball and Bindy were driving to a nightclub when Bindy made an illegal turn and got pulled over by the police. And that's when Bindy pulled out a gun and told Ball to tell the police that it was his, resulting in him breaching probation and receiving 8 or 9 months in prison. But the unusual part about all of this was that Ball knew that Bindy was always careful with carrying a gun, and would only have one on him if he planned on using it. That's when you realize that Bindy might have planned on murdering him that night. Ball ended up pleading guilty and taking the time, not because he wanted to take the fall for Bindy, but because of the perfect alibi he would receive. Ball said, quote-unquote, "When Bindy was getting reckless, I took over the Elite. I told them to get him. I gave them $20,000 and they got Bindy in a nightclub." At 1:30 a.m. on December 20th, 1998, Bindy was shot in the back of the head at close range inside of a nightclub in downtown Vancouver. Over 300 witnesses were there when the murder happened, but nobody came forward to identify the shooter, and to this day, the shooter was never arrested. Bindy Johal clearly had a violent story and was involved in lots of criminal behavior, but at the beginning of the video, I mentioned that Bindy is seen as a hero to many people, and I'll talk about why now. Doing my research on Bindy, I saw a common trend from a large part of the community who knows about him. You see, back in the 80s, racism was a very major thing in Canada, so many people would essentially bully Indian people. Lots of Indians were immigrating to Canada at that time and would get insulted and assaulted for no reason. Much of the Indian community who was around and facing racism at that time agrees that Bindy is obviously no saint and was still a criminal and a drug dealer who caused lots of violence. But lots argued that when he became known in the city and the face of an Indian person was on the news terrorizing the city, things changed, and for racism towards Indian people's case, for the better. Since now brown people weren't just a defenseless target. Bindy showed that any race, including Indians, can be dangerous and that you can't do whatever you want to them. Apparently Bindy even dealt with people who were racist even if they were in his own ranks. But on the other end of the spectrum, there's lots of people who understandably only see him as a criminal. Let me know what you thought about this down in the comments. Also comment if you want to see more videos in other parts of Canada as well, or if I should just stick to the Toronto content. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video and want to see more in the future. Thanks for watching and have a good one.